Let's actually play the game this time, shall we?
Oh, dude. 4x for that guy. Get him out of here. Can I report him? These are iRacing jokes, chat. You should watch my other racing content. You get hilarious comedy.
Right, the first thing I wanted to do was to finish up of the ocean quests. Well, not the ocean quests, but rather finish unlocking all of the thingies. The map, I'll probably just use the guide as a reference. Next step is... Or is it Trade City of Ugari? This is Trade City of Agarit. I already did IAA as well. Oh my god, we get to do a quest with the pale horses here? Holy shit, they're amazing. Holy shit, they're farmers. They are amazing. Why are we the ones getting all the glory? And getting all the important stuff? Alright, apparently all that's left is the aerial forest. All I need is a salted fish meat, so... From the fourth foothold? I don't have the fourth foothold! I think I still need to go to AIA, I think. Maybe. Why the frick are there money yen? It's Japanese yen specifically. And apparently, Etrian Odyssey does take place in a post-apocalyptic future. The first game actually takes place in like Canada or something apparently. And since it takes place somewhere located in the West clearly, why the fuck would it use N? As far as I'm aware at least, Canadians use dollars. Maybe it's not Canadian specifically, but it definitely isn't Japan. There's still a lot. Of items I could be using. Why the heck does this guide not tell me how to get them? Alright, I need to go here. The aircon already turned off, and it's already so hot. Very nice. The fuck is a stonefish? I feel like I am supposed to be able to take that. But I need Garum first, whatever that is. That's a net loss. I think I need to go back. Fuck, you're in the way. Don't have any. I don't know how to improvise from there, so I probably could have, but heck, my throat feels very dry. How and where the fuck is the fourth foothold game to walk through? Somewhere around here. Alright, never mind. Let's just get straight to the dungeon.
Yeah, except there's less explosions. Did I give up on Grand Prix World Sub 50? Oh god, no. As well as on Wall Street top 3 worst movies to watch with your parents. I've seen a lot of worse movies. Yeah. What am I setting up my rig to work this game? I don't think I can do that. Yeah, I don't think that's possible, honestly.
Let's explore. First I want to get all the tests.
I mean, it depends on what we're including as, like, bad movies. Yeah.
I can also do the quests.
That's been released and things.
Yep, these guys are still easy.
I don't know, I feel like there's way more awkward ones than Wolf of Wall Street. It depends on how many moves you think your parents did in the 80s, I guess.
That fucking bunny. I might be able to snag a bit for a lot of XP. guys could just stop being in the way for a second. He is just very fast.
Give me all your uppies. I need all your uppies. Give me your uppies. I'm gonna need uppies in this one, chat.
No.
Need uppies.
Where did it go now? So I do believe we can take it on right now with our current
Shit,
equipment
that's
and
not where I wanted it. Damn it.
stuff.
Oh, actually, that's a really good uppie. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Okay, never mind. That was a great uppie. Ah, shit.
Given the pale horse is consisting entirely
We're screwed.
of farmers, I think it makes a lot of sense that they take so much value on camps. That's basically the only way they're able to do anything.
Quaaludes, not, yeah, Quaaludes is what I meant.
Then again, there was a quest where you had to try finding them, and then it turns out
Parents did a lot of them as a kid.
they murdered a shit ton of enemies and stuff. Explain that.
I like how people say that, they always assume Sweet Grand Prix events will be available every 30 minutes. Rack up tickets now. Oh, really? Really? Okay. Okay. Yeah, this game's very good. I like it a lot. Lion, thank you for the 6 months. I really appreciate it. What do we think we're gonna do? Is there an exact date on Queen League? Somebody thinks Thursday because that's when it came out. It came out on a Thursday, and I think that's a pretty good guess. Yes.
No. I was so close. Holy shit, how did it get all the way over there?
Yeah, the bottom X keep getting eliminated. I've never been eliminated. I've never been eliminated outside of a crash for the last 10, though. I mean, come on. Come on. Come on.
I think it would be efficient
Only the top 20 make it.
to go accept some quests. Get some XP from them.
Oh shit, fuck chat. Damn, these fucking bastards.
Alright, this. How annoying.
Had to focus.
I already have a bolt hammer though, so what's gonna happen there?
What a dick.
Oh wow, there's a limit.
Get away from me, blue car.
The Tanyan should be available. Yep.
Close race there. Close race. Close race. Bone shot. Yes, you all owe 100 gift subs in the race. What's that word? Yeah, not even 58. That's a bad start. Really bad start right there. Mr. X, thank you for the 3 months. That was a tough win. I got really good uppies, so yeah. This reminds you of the old F-Zero. I mean, it is the old F-Zero game. This was 99 people. And much updated graphics. Even though they don't look like they're updated, they're super updated. Yeah. It looks so much better than the old one. The old one looks like ass. Is that a P-switch in the background? Oh my god, F-Zero takes place in Nintendo World, chat. In Mario World. Look at that, it's a fucking P-switch in the background.
That's an update. No point being selfish.
Wow, that just blew my mind. Look at, there's a bunch of P-switches in the background. We're not gonna do this right here. We're gonna wait. This is definitely my worst track, I think. Oh, damn, I wanted that KO. I almost tried to slow down, but I didn't have space. That one was pretty good, though. I'm gonna kill myself. What? I wonder if I would have hung out on the left there if I would have got more. Did I not? Damn it. I thought I KO'd them. Yeah. I had it all, I blew it. I know I did right there. I thought I KO'd them. That's what happened. I got just a little too aggressive. A little too aggressive there. Dude, DJs, I had so much fun.
I remember now.
Just had so much fun at the.
I'm missing 3 left.
I mean, we were in full couple mode too. Like, we did what we wanted, took naps. It was just
I'm
great.
guessing this is speed, which would be very useful.
Had the absolute best time.
As for the remaining 2, I have nary a clue.
It's not the only one they're gonna let me get it.
This is pretty much every status effect. Or maybe this depends.
We'll save our tickets. We're not gonna earn a ton of tickets before this weekend.
Unlock the
There's so
event.
many. Yay! So many like check-in tickets though. Yeah, I was gonna say it probably wouldn't have got a full race. It probably wouldn't have gotten a full race. Yeah. Started using the Fox, you're still gonna get used to it. This is a good Fox level chat. The key is right here. You gotta wait as long as you can.
There really isn't much to gain here. So I should just get this over with quickly. Hey, nice. You didn't try to kill me this time. I'll be right back. I want some water. There's something about my throat.
There we go. Alright. Fuck you, blue one. I knew that blue one was gonna hit me. That blue one had eyeballs for me, man. I knew he was gonna hit me. Oh, this one too. I feel like this one's gonna get me. That was a good win. That was a good win. Jesus, easy. There's Big Blue. Big Blue's the only one that I feel like I really Big Blue and Port Town I struggle with it nightly. Do I want a snack? No, I think that's gonna be it. I think that's gonna be it for me today. I just want to tell everyone. Wait, previous best total. Oh, is that my fastest I've ever gone? I'm honestly good as fuck. There's people better than me. They're like the people that I used to make a YouTube video the other day. They're better than me. Lunaire, Zerwig, they're better than me. But for like the casual non-F-Zero players, yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good for the casual non-F-Zero players. I've done pretty well. I've been able to learn, and I haven't watched anyone else. This is all everything I do is meta, like. Seen in game or come up with, you know. Like, not that other people haven't come up with that meta too, but yeah. No, there's lots of other people that are really good. They're always gonna be better. I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. I'm not bad. I'm not bad. Yeah, I'm not bad. I think we gotta raid Zach, chat, right? Yeah, I think we gotta raid Zach. Anybody able to tell you what game was in the short about hype? Which one? I don't know which short. I don't know which shorts go up because I love my lovely editor, who is a genius for this, puts them up on different platforms different times, so I don't know which one you're talking about. No platform ever gets the same short the same day anymore, which is fun. Second one. I really thank y'all so much. This week we're gonna be doing, I don't know, some Mario, definitely some Mario hacks this week.
I think I can only get this, yep,
Playing F-Zero.
in the morning. How annoying.
We're getting some Baldur's Gate in this week. Might have a few surprises. And I really want to get something Pokemon in there. Yeah, we're doing Wednesday Friends Day. We are doing something tomorrow.
Damn, 79 fish.
And also, chat, just to get y'all hyped, starting next week, we're gonna have something I'm gonna have something really cool that you all are gonna be able to participate in with my community, and we're gonna be fighting another community. They're small, but they're ferocious ants, so I'll need all your help, chat. I love y'all. Bye!
Oh, I can't open it yet. I haven't progressed through the story enough. That's lame. And will those frogs drop what I want? Pretty sure they only show up in this floor, so... Not who I'm after, and it's nighttime. How the heck did you show up? There isn't anything else left for me to get. One more slimy leg. I might benefit from bringing the farmer ladies. Neither of them have witchcraft though, which is how you get increased item rates. Where are the fucking frogs? It's almost morning, so... It looks like it's just a random chance for me to get what I want. There it is. Should be morning by the time I get to the quest location, so... I'm gonna register this party. I'm gonna put Vale in the back first. I want Vale in the front for this team, but so Athlete's a robot now. Do I have an explanation for that? Yeah, it turns out she was a robot this whole time. And that's why she sucked. Because she hadn't been using her full powers. But then she realized she's actually an Igdroid. And that she has time travel powers. There. Whoops, I haven't sold this stuff yet. Eureka's growing nicely. Dang it, I don't have anything to watch. Whoa, it's me.
From bone and stone, and they're simple. Spears, daggers, clubs. They don't have the ability to forge steel. So the party won the battle easily, killed one of them, and took their max. That's going to be important for later.
Now let's switch to attack mode so I can show you how I run combats and use terrain efficiently to bring the Lost City to life at my table.
Hi, I'm GM Scotty from the DM's Craft, and I'm here to show you how to use the ultimate dungeon terrain, UDT for short. Forget grids, they slow play. The center ring represents the character's light source or anything within melee distance. Anyone can attack the bug, and the bug can attack anyone. Now, if a wizard wants, he can move to range distance to cast spells safely. Now, he can hit the bug, but the bug can't hit him. As long as it's engaged with the other characters, you can move one range band and still attack. So how long is range distance? It's within the range of a spell or bow. We don't need a count feat. What happens if a character is at range distance and the bug moves to them? Uh-oh. Then the range distance becomes the melee distance. Put them both in the center circle. Now the characters are attacked by the Syndeseans, alright? The wizard has the initiative and nukes one. The rest move into attack. In round 1, the barbarian kills 2 Syndeseans. The next round, he can move anywhere in the circle and attack again. What happens if a character moves off the board? They're completely separated from the group, where they will probably be swarmed by monsters, torn to bits, and love to find out the hard way to never split the party. UDT allows you more world and less space, with the exception of a one set piece. The entire Lost City campaign was played on this board. If you want to learn how to make cool terrain for cheap, check out my channel, The DM's Craft, and my EZD6 RPG for Runehammer Games.
Tier 3 contains temples for each of the anti-Syndesean factions. The Mages of Usumagaras, the Brotherhood of Gorm, and the Warrior Maidens of Madarua. They're all connected by a rotating hallway. So the characters went down the hall leading to the Temple of the Warrior Maidens of Madarua, which contains an alarm system, so as soon as they entered, the maidens were alerted. After some exploration, they discover the Warrior Maidens' treasure vault and pick the lock, and just as they're about to steal the loot, the secret door in the south wall opens, and 20 Warrior Maidens flood into the room and surround them. I use the BX2D6 reaction table. I still think it's the best. I gave the players a penalty because they're in the middle of a robbery, and the result was a 6, uncertain. So I let them negotiate. They dropped their weapons and said they came in peace, that they were lost in a sandstorm and were only looking for water. Did I call for a charisma check? No. I have the players roleplay it out and decide what happens based on what they say. Warrior Maidens accepted their apology, gave them water, and invited the female fighters to join their group. They accepted, swore an oath, agreeing to worship Madarua, got a tattoo, were given new armor and weapons, and an exposition dump. The sisters explained there are 4 different factions in constant conflict over territory, and they all hate each other. The worst are the Syndeseans, who are led by an evil cult and worship a false god whose name they will not even utter. They told the characters of the existence of the Lost City, and there's entrance on level 5 in an area controlled by the cult. The Warrior Maidens, Mages of Usumagaras, and Brotherhood of Gorm all have their main temples in this underground city. These 4 factions exist in a sort of détente, with minor skirmishes breaking out, but no side able to get the upper hand. Although the Maidens, Brotherhood, and Mages are highly skilled, they are vastly outnumbered by the Syndeseans. This proved to be a satisfying conclusion to the session, because my players are the problem-solving types. They need periodic reminders they are making progress. Aligning themselves with the Warrior Maidens allowed them to establish a home base where they could heal if they became wounded. I also allowed them to keep the XP from stealing the Maidens' 3,000 gold piece treasure. And that's where session 1 ended. Players completed 2.5 dungeon levels in 2.5 hours. How? They avoid combat unless it's absolutely necessary. And I avoid saying, make a perception check every 10 feet. Session 2 started with the characters going to the Temple of the Mages of Usumagaras. They presumed it would go just as well. The party did contain a mage. What could go wrong? The party enters, and the magic user, Xander of the Vault, announces that he comes in peace from the outside world and wants to join them. And I roll a reaction in public, so my players know I'm not fudging, and it comes up snake eyes, so I say, the hair on your arms stand up, and the air smells of ozone from 24 wizards simultaneously shooting up magic missile. Did I call for initiative? No. Nothing kills the pace of a game faster than calling for initiative. The party wanted to run, and there was nothing blocking their escape, so there's no attack of opportunity. I just described the magic missiles hammering the door just as the characters slammed it. After some searching, they found the entrance to the lower level, a former temple defaced with graffiti that reads Zargon, their first clue as to the identity of the main villain. Tier 4 is a sprawling necropolis housing the tombs of the warriors, servants, priests of King Alexander and Queen Zenobia. There are lots of classic scenes, like Queen Zenobia, who's now a wife, jumping out of her tomb, and a cool pendulum trap featured on the back cover. And my players skipped all of it. This is the path they chose, completely avoiding these classic scenes. They also avoided conflict. They went to the captain's burial chamber, saw a bunch of skeletons, and said, "We shut the door." They enter the embalming rooms, and the shadows start coming to life, and they say, "Screw this, we're out." They did have a pretty good fight with a carrion crawler in room 40. They also found a partial map in another room, which is a treasure unto itself. My players love map fragments. Again, it gives them a feeling they're making progress. But they focused like a laser on getting to the next level, located in the secret trap door in room 27. The trap door is so secret that it's not even on the map. And they descended into level 5. And that's how session 2 ended, clocking in at just over 2 hours. At this point, I start giving out milestone XP for descending to level 5, which is controlled by the Cult of Zargon. I had to get my players to at least 3rd level to give them a fighting chance against Zargon, who's a formidable opponent. The current head of the Cult of Zargon is the evil Darius. Years ago, he murdered his twin brother Demetrius, but Demetrius' ghost still haunts his chamber. His spirit is contained in a robe in his bedroom. Did one of the players put it on? Of course they did. So he becomes possessed and leads the players directly through Tier 5 to kill his brother. This is where I change some rooms around. 51 is supposed to be the Temple to Zargon. 50 is supposed to be an entry chamber to the Lost City. It contains a number of statues and frescoes revealing the history of Synedecia. I switched these rooms so that players would learn the history of Synedecia first. They can't read hieroglyphics, but they get the gist of Synedicia's rise and fall and learn that the followers of Gorm, Usumagaris, and Madarui used to be friends before the Cult of Zargon took over. And this room contains about 50 or so tripping Synedicians. Lost in their own worlds, they don't even acknowledge the characters as they pass through the room. As written, 57 to 58 are where the characters finally meet evil Darius. But, at least by my standards, it's a bit anticlimactic. I wanted to end the 3rd session with a bang, an epic encounter, so I turned this room into a massive temple to Zargon, complete with a sacrificial pit in the middle, similar to the one described in Area K of the Goodman Games update on pages 135 to 136. So let's talk room design. When designing an encounter, I always follow the index card RPG model of 3 T's. You need a timer, you need a threat, and you need a treat. The threat is Darius and his cultists. There are 4 minion cultists, each with 1 hit point. One of them is off camera. In the center of the room is a pit that leads 60 feet down into Zargon's lair. Those are the tips of his longest tentacles sticking out, searching for food. Behind the altar is Darius, an evil cleric, and he's about to ritually sacrifice a warrior maiden Madarua to a very hungry Zargon. In the right corner is the Brute, Darius' bodyguard. Exposure to the fumes of the temple have caused him to mutate and grow tentacles, and he will protect Darius at all costs. On the other side is the priestess. Her job is to sacrifice a prisoner, a warrior maiden of Madarua, or it could be a brother of Gorm. These are equal opportunity cultists. She will turn the mechanism that dumps the victim into the pit in D4 rounds. The cultists will do their best to murder the characters and block Darius from any missile fire or ranged spells. Starting in round 2, Zargon's tentacles grab a random target every round and try to drag them into the pit. So the party rushes in, slicing off limbs, kicking cultists into the pit. Zargon's tentacles dragging a couple of them into doom, and they rescue the warrior maiden at the last possible moment. It was awesome. And the best was Darius, the character possessed by Demetrius. They tied initiative, both rolled natural 20, impaled each other, and fell into the pit. The character died, but it was epic. And they rescued a warrior maiden who can point out the secret door in the room that leads directly to the Lost City. Here is the path my players took. and the session took only 2 hours. In room 48, which my players never went to, is a staircase that leads to tiers 6. Tiers 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are more of the same, a series of rooms each containing a different monster and treasure. Room 100 is Zargon's lair, and I gotta say, it's a bit underwhelming. The mighty Zargon lives in a 40 by 40 box. The thing is, as a game master, you need to know when to read the room and end your campaign. My players who played The Lost City as kids but never completed were having a great time dungeon crawling, but my other players wanted more of a story. We needed to wrap it up in a couple of sessions, so I cut tiers 6, 7, 8, and 9. At my table, the Lost City is the final tier, and it contains a direct entrance to Zargon's lair. I could have stretched it 2 or more sessions, but I saw in the group text that everyone was going to be at the next session, and I prefer to end my campaigns when all the players are there, so I thought, this is where we're going to end it.
Hello, I'm Bob, and this is where we learn how to have more fun playing RPGs together, and today I'm here to talk to you about Professor Dungeon Master's house rules, Deathbringer. Deathbringer is old-school D&D with a twist. Defined feats and skills are replaced with Deathbringer dice, a pool of d6s.
Alright, so any suggestion from the other people is good. I doubt the cost for storing goods got any cheaper. Sure, Vale can stop thinking about Iya for once.
dice. A pool of d6s players can spend to add to any d20 roll, add to a damage roll, or block incoming damage. You can use multiple Deathbringer dice at once to inflict massive damage, and players can give them freely to one another. Deathbringer dice allows characters to perform fantastic stunts or score extra damage just when it really counts.
So at long last, 35 years for some, my players finally arrive at the Lost City. It has a very 1 billion years BC feel with a giant mushroom forest and lake and volcano, and my players wanted none of it. They went straight for the Temple of Madarua. So much for all my prep work. Using masks they collected along the way, the party disguised themselves as Synodicians and made their way through the crowded streets packed with dancing Synodicians whacked out on cake mushrooms, clearly celebrating something. At the temple, they're introduced to the queen, who explains the Synodicians are celebrating the annual selection of a bride to be sacrificed to Zargon. They told her the lost history they had discovered, that long ago the Brotherhood mages and maidens all worked together to build Synodician into a prosperous empire. If only they could put aside their differences, they could restore their empire to its former glory. They persuade the queen to host a diplomatic banquet and invite the heads of the Brotherhood and the mages. There they reveal their plan. When the bride is sacrificed to Zargon, the players will bum rush the doors to his lair and kill him. At the same time, the Brotherhood, mages, and warrior maidens working together can take down the Temple of Zargon. Did I call for a charisma check? No, I don't hinge
So Olympia
on
just
charisma checks.
doesn't show up. We find the note on our own.
All the NPC factions to achieve their goal. Why would they refuse? My player Veronica loves love stories, and I said the king of the Brotherhood looked like Brad Pitt. The queen of the warrior maidens looked like Miss Ukraine, so she really wanted them to fall in love. That I made her roll for, because that's like extra credit, and she was successful, which made her very happy. And the next day, when the cultists opened the doors to Zargon's lair, the players rushed in for the final showdown. Zargon's lair is a massive chamber of eldritch antiquity, a grim charnel house filled with mountains of bones, and the stench of 1,000 years of accumulated waste. As the characters approach, Zargon communicates with them telepathically and gives them a villain speech about how he is immortal and their actions are futile. Zargon is a massive Cthulhuid monstrosity. Anyone in the same circle is within range of his 8 tentacles for d6 damage, and his massive jaws which inflict 3d8 damage. Those are brave twists that hide behind piles of bones for +4 cover, but they can still be attacked by those tentacles, although they're out of the reach of Zargon's fight. I do all the stat bots index card RPG style, +7 to all stats in all rolls, and on a natural 20, Zargon slices or bites off the target's head. No death save, instant death. Not even Deathbringer dice can save you. And I warn the players this when the combat begins, so they know what's at stake. I don't use legendary actions where the characters have to save versus fear and pretend to be afraid. I make the players actually afraid for their characters' lives. They know what's at stake up front, so it's fair. They also have backup characters who gain experience at 1 level lower. The main character dropped and was sent in the backup through waiting in the wings. And the battle was epic. The party won initiative and carved huge chunks out of Zargon's slimy hide. Then it was his turn. Pounded the characters into the dirt. Only Deathbringer dice saved them from destruction. The characters were all down to 1 or 2 hit points when one player rolled a natural 20. Critical hit scoring over 20 hit points of damage, and she spent all 6 of her Deathbringer dice to do even more damage. Then the rest of the players used their Deathbringer dice, inflicting over 70 hit points of damage.
Sure, sorry, morning.
The immortal crashed to the ground dead at last. It was some kind of miracle. I didn't roll a single 20, but the players loved it. They were cheering. I asked my players to describe how the campaign ends for their characters. One wanted to stay with the mages and rebuild the city. Another wanted to return to civilization with a warrior maiden. Another wanted to run off with a brother of Gorm. and all live happily ever after. But if they want, they can put those characters into my long-running main campaign. But your players could continue exploring the Lost City. The Good New Games Edition has lots of bonus content that could last months. We finished the campaign in 4 sessions, but Wizards of the Coast data shows the average D&D campaign only lasts 7 sessions. I believe it's better to end a campaign too soon and leave your players wanting more. Have it drag on the game's interest. At least that's what I think. What do you think? And did you play the Lost City back in the day? And if so, did you actually make it to the Lost City? Let me know in the comments below. Also below, you'll find links to my bonus content on...
Is Brazilian. Keep that in mind as the clip continues. The average Japanese person knows little to nothing about South America. Greater than half of the cultural references in this clip are Mexican, and everything else is Brazilian. Unless that big smiling sun counts as a reference to Argentina and Uruguay, which I strongly doubt. Brazil is the one South American country whose culture often finds its way into Japanese games, and it happens with surprising frequency, albeit often in a perhaps culturally mixed up way. You may also be familiar with Splatoon 3's Anarchy Rainbow, a song that combines Japanese odori and Brazilian samba, delivered in-game during Splatfest, a festival which itself combines the style of Japanese Matsuri and Brazilian Carnival. In fact, Big Man, noted ambulatory manta ray and hero of the people, is often said to be Brazilian. Another perhaps more traditional example of such a video game character is Brazilian video game icon Blanka, the electric green ape man who debuted in Street Fighter II. Now you might see Blanka as a bit of an insulting caricature, but I mean, this was the 90s. Street Fighter II only had 8 characters in its playable roster. Japan was represented twice with Ryu and E. Honda. The USA was represented twice with Ken and Guile. The Soviet Union, China, and India each got a character. And these are all very important populous countries with a lot of cultural relevance to Japan. And then there's Brazil with Blanka seemingly out of nowhere. Consider how odd that is. If you exclude the USSR, the entire continent of Europe doesn't get a single character. The entire continent of Africa doesn't get a single character, and it loses Madagascar. Australia doesn't get a character, and New Zealand doesn't even get to be on the map. Or Iceland, or any part of Denmark, including but not limited to Greenland. Nowadays, of course, the Street Fighter roster is much more diverse. Africa and Europe have characters now. New Zealand gets to be on the map. And according to the Street Fighter Wiki, we have like something between 7 to 11 whole characters from South America, including DJ.
This place seems to be where the gigapeats are, so...
Guys, you know that Jamaica is in North America, right? It's okay, let's take a look at the other characters repping South America. We have Blanka, of course, who is from Brazil, Carlos Miyamoto from Final Fight, who's from Brazil, Peter Zonta from Brazil, Shun from the Street Fighter Alpha, the animation who is from Brazil, and finally, Jean Matsuda, the Matsuda family, and his sister Laura, who are from Brazil. That's right, the Street Fighter Wiki has 11 entries on South American characters, 2 of which are North American, and the rest of which are Brazilian. And this is not unusual for Japanese games or their representation of South America. South America is basically only Brazil, and sometimes Peru, to the Japanese. But why? What makes Brazil so special to Japan? Is it the beautiful beaches and people? Is it the warm, sunny weather and sunnier dispositions? Is it the commenters in all of their YouTube videos constantly asking them to go to Brazil? No, it's actually a curious quirk of history. That's right, this is a history video, and it's actually quite a fascinating story. Once you've learned the history, you will come to understand how strongly linked Japan and Brazil really are, and how that cultural heritage manifests itself in all kinds of ways you may not have previously noticed. Our story begins someplace Moon Channel viewers might find familiar. The year is 1854, and Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy has just forced Japan to open its ports to American trade by negotiating in the traditional American fashion. Give us what we want or be subject to incredible violence. The shogunate, the Bakufu, is in total disarray, and a complete economic collapse is looming on Japan's horizon. You see, prior to 1854, Japan had adopted an isolationist foreign policy called Sakoku, which prohibited trade and foreign relations between Japan and most of the rest of the world. There were some
so the
exceptions, which my
Sakoku
previous
decree is
video
literally
didn't get
named
into, like
word
Rangaku
per
or
word.
Dutch learning. But the Western innovations that came to Japan through Rangaku did not come close to preparing Japan for the unimpeded influx of Western ideas, technology, and
How
capital
original.
thrust upon Japan by Matthew Perry. In other words, nobody told Japan that life was going to be this way, and the consequence was that their tech's a joke, they're broke, and their foreign relations are DOA. So let me ask you, if you were in the Japanese government's shoes here, how would you get yourself unstuck from second gear when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your year? Well, the first thing you'd probably want to do is get yourself caught up, catch up technologically, catch up economically, and build a foreign presence. But how does one go about that? We'll get back to this question shortly. In the meantime, we need to take ourselves to the other side of the world and see what is going on in Brazil. The year is 1850. It has been only 28 years since Brazil declared its independence from the Kingdom of Portugal. The first Emperor of Brazil, Dom Pedro I, suddenly abdicated and left for Europe, leaving his son, the 5-year-old Dom Pedro II, as the child emperor of Brazil. The Empire of Brazil appears to be on the very precipice of collapse, and yet, despite all odds, Pedro II, Pedro the Magnanimous, one of modern history's greatest and most noble leaders, manages to turn the country around. Brazil is beginning to stabilize, and the global market for coffee brings a period of new profit in industry into Brazil known as the coffee cycle. The railroads are expanding, the ports are being developed, the absolute value of Brazilian exports are the highest in Latin America, triple those of Argentina at the time. Brazil's future is bright. How bright? Well, by 1880, the Brazilian per capita income was similar to that of the United States, and many economists of the time predicted that Brazil, under the leadership of the very people-minded Pedro II, would become as wealthy and developed as the wealthiest of the Western European countries. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. Returning to the 1850s, the coffee trade at the time was heavily reliant upon slave labor. But Pedro II abhorred slavery, and he made it his mission to abolish slavery in Brazil, even if he had to do it without any public support. In 1850, Pedro II made his first move. He threatened to abdicate the throne unless the General Assembly declared the Atlantic slave trade illegal. Having stopped the flow of new slaves from abroad, Pedro II then sought to end slavery by birth, and to do so, he spoke openly about the eradication of slavery and pushed a bill which would consider all children born to slaves freeborn. This abolitionist stance was deeply unpopular amongst the Brazilian people at the time, and Pedro II was heavily criticized for his insistence on abolition. Slavery supporters claimed that higher labor costs might lead to job cuts and worse production and weaker harvests, but the emperor's skilled leadership would prevail over his detractors, even as his own health seriously declined. The late 1800s saw Brazil's economy grow to new heights. Women gained unprecedented rights in Brazil during this time, and slowly but surely, the edifice of slavery was also crumbling. By 1888, the emperor was so ill that he was lying on what many presumed to be his deathbed in Europe, being treated by the very best physicians available in Milan. Yet even while deathly ill, he pushed for the abolition of slavery, and when slavery was finally abolished in Brazil on May 22, 1888, it is said that the emperor wept tears of joy. Perhaps this moment helped to heal him, as he recovered enough to return to Rio de Janeiro from Milan in August of 1888, where he was greeted with never-before-seen enthusiasm and love from his people. The predictions of economic disaster and labor disruption that were supposed to come from the abolition of slavery never happened, and the coffee harvest of 1888 was bountiful. You would think then, with the Brazilian economy soaring to never-before-seen heights, the international prestige of Brazil reaching an apex, and the people of Brazil totally unified behind a kind and brilliant leader, that the former harshest critics of slavery, the wealthy, land-owning coffee farmers, would fall in line and enjoy the fruits of a Brazilian golden age. Instead, though, the wealthy landowners were furious at losing their free labor, and these landowners organized a coup d'etat in hopes of instituting what they called a republic. When the coup happened, it is said that those in attendance believed it to be a joke, The rich, elite landowning revolutionaries seized the prime minister and instituted the Republic of Brazil on November 15, 1889. The emperor himself, old and tired, having given everything of himself for his country, lacked the will to resist. He foresaw the bloodshed and suffering that civil war would bring to his beloved people. And so, when the revolution came, Pedro II merely said, "If it is so, it will be my retirement. I have worked too hard, and I am tired. I will go rest then." Historian Lydia Bessuchet writes on the coup d'etat, "Rarely has a revolution been so minor." We'll stop here for a moment before we get into the consequences of the First Republic. Keep these takeaways in mind, though. Number 1. Brazil in the 1850s had just abolished the slave trade and was on its way towards abolishing slavery for good. Number 2. Brazil's economy was developing at an astonishing rate under the guidance of a brilliant leader. And number 3. Brazil was rapidly industrializing with a standard of living that appeared to be approaching Western European standards. It is with this context in mind that we now return to Japan. Japan had just been forced out of a greater than quarter-millennium-long period of isolation from the rest of the world, and its agricultural techniques and economic systems were completely unprepared for global trade. Japan suffered simultaneously from severe famines and massive unemployment. Attempts at agrarian reform and mechanization of agriculture left thousands upon thousands of peasants unemployed, just as new Western diseases also swept across Japan. Do you remember the question I asked earlier? Given all of this chaos, how did Japan manage to catch up both technologically and economically while also stabilizing its foreign relations? Well, you catch up by learning from others. You build up by bringing the pay you get from others back home, and you stabilize foreign relations by building a foreign presence. All three of these things can be done if you send your people abroad as immigrants. Now, immigration in the late 1800s and early 1900s is quite a different animal than it is today. And back then, it was not only okay, but encouraged to do the racism part of the calculus out loud. The Japanese of the time were poor, unskilled at Western labor, and decidedly not white. The United States, for example, barred Chinese immigration in the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, and Japanese immigration to the United States as per the informal terms of the Gentlemen's Agreement of 1907, which was later formalized in the Immigration Act of 1924. Australia at the time had implemented the rather on-the-nose White Australia policy. But it just so happens there was one country out there, one shining city on a hill, one bastion of liberty that chose to open its doors to specifically permit Japanese immigration. And that country was Brazil. But it wasn't necessarily for the most noble reasons. You see, after the abdication of Pedro II, the fledgling Republic of Brazil was plagued by corruption and poor economic management, as one might expect when your coup d'etat comes not from the people, but from wealthy landowners. The rich got richer, the poor got poorer, and the shortage of slaves in an economy now run by former slave owners meant that a labor shortage had developed where there had not been one before. The Japanese government was eager to send its people into the world to learn and bring money and technology home to Japan. The Brazilian government was eager for cheap, expendable labor, and so in 1907, the Brazilian and Japanese governments signed a treaty permitting Japanese migration to Brazil. In 1908, 781 Japanese people, mostly farmers, sailed from Kobe across the Indian Ocean and south around the Cape of Good Hope before finally arriving in Brazil. And not long thereafter, the floodgates opened. By 1914, an additional nearly 15,000 Japanese arrived in Brazil, many bringing with them their whole families. And the outbreak of World War I saw even more Japanese coming to Brazil to work on Brazilian coffee plantations. By 1940, there were already nearly 200,000 Japanese immigrants living in Brazil. But life was not easy for the Japanese in Brazil. Many Japanese imagined that they'd be going to Brazil to get rich before going home to Japan and newly wealthy. The Brazilian plantation owners, though, you must remember, were looking to replace the labor of slaves. And the previously high wages these Brazilian plantation owners had to pay to Brazilian laborers, the very same wages responsible for Pedro II's expanding economy, were reduced to nearly nothing. You can pay whatever you want if your worker has no better option. Japanese immigrants to Brazil were worked to the bone for little to no wages. Oftentimes, these immigrant workers had to buy their food and goods directly from the landowner, company store style, such that instead of wealth, the immigrant workers would slowly work themselves into debt. The immense poverty of the Japanese immigrants also caused the average Brazilian person to view them with contempt. After all, to the average person, these immigrants appear to be coming en masse without their consent, taking their previously high-paying jobs for almost nothing, and reducing the prosperity of their country. We know now, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, that it was the landowners enforcing a slave-owning mentality, with massive violations of already limited labor laws, vanishingly low pay, exploitative business practices like company stores, and threats of physical violence, all but enforcing poverty amongst the Japanese population. The Japanese, though, would very slowly crawl their way out of this desperate situation. Some Japanese would very literally crawl, escaping their indentured servitude by fleeing their plantations in the dark of night, a process which would become known as yoniga. Other Japanese had the fortune of encountering landowners who had more land than greed, and so offered more hands-off contracts to Japanese immigrants, wherein these immigrants would deforest land and grow coffee for their landlords, a little bit like a feudal peasant. But these immigrants were able to accumulate a bit of capital, leading to the first land purchased by a Japanese person in Brazil occurring in 1911. As more and more Japanese people began to purchase land together, forced to do so really as they were seen as undesirable by the Brazilian population at large, they developed ethnic enclave communities known as shokuminshi. And the Japanese, finally able to work their own land for their own benefit, proved to be very productive indeed. Historical documents show that in 1940, despite the Japanese making up only 3.5% of Sao Paulo's population, they were responsible for nearly all of the production of silk, peaches, strawberries, mint, tea, potatoes, assorted vegetables, and eggs. The Japanese also controlled a not insubstantial portion of the market for bananas at 50%, cotton at 40%, and even coffee at 20%. But again, these communities of Japanese were still seen as troublesome, unwelcome, poor, outsiders, and so many Japanese children born in Brazil would be educated in the Japanese language run by the Japanese community. Many of these immigrants never learned to speak Portuguese, and almost none of these Japanese in Brazil would marry outside of their ethnic enclaves. Not because they wouldn't have liked to, but because the Brazilian population at large considered them detestable and undesirable. The Brazilian media at the time called these Japanese enclaves quistos raciais, racial cysts, like a cancer. The Brazilian public opinion of the time was that Japanese were too different, too zealous, too uneducated to be integrated into the more sophisticated and worldly Brazilian society. With the Brazilian government unwilling to provide any assistance to these Japanese communities, the Japanese government stepped in and provided funding to these enclaves. By 1933, there were 150,000 Japanese in Brazil, and almost all of them lived in these ethnic communities, where they spoke Japanese, ate Japanese food, wore Japanese clothes, and learned in Japanese schools funded by the Japanese government. Which brings us now back to Brazil. The Brazilian Republic, with its slavery-supporting, plantation-owning leadership, pulled its policies away from the more progressive thinking of Pedro II. Where under Pedro II, Brazil saw the abolition of slavery, more rights for women, celebration of diversity, and massive growth in both economic prosperity and quality of life, the landlord leadership of the Republic encouraged divisions in society that last in some capacity even to this day. Attempts were made by Brazilian representatives to prohibit, and I quote, the immigration of individuals from the black race to Brazil. Other attempts were also made to limit Asians, and by the 1930s, the government of the authoritarian President Getúlio Vargas, who has a mixed legacy in Brazil, we'll say, instituted forced assimilation of immigrants, stating, and I quote, the concentration of immigrants anywhere in the country is prohibited. The law should govern the selection, location, and assimilation of the alien. As Brazilian nationalism grew under the leadership of Getúlio Vargas in the late 1930s, many of these so-called Japanese cysts were systematically assimilated. Japanese newspapers and teaching the Japanese language in schools were banned. All Japanese would learn only Portuguese. The Japanese had a much higher level of education than the average Brazilian by this time, with nearly 90% of Japanese being able to read newspapers while the average Brazilian was illiterate. Yet still, the Japanese were considered undesirable. Oliveira Viana, a Brazilian
that's
historian,
typical.
describes the
I heard a
Japanese
similar
as being
story in my
like
country when
sulfur,
the
insoluble.
Spanish invaded
The
us.
Brazilian magazine O Mario compared Japanese people in Brazil to a disease and described the Japanese as a race diametrically opposed
Magellan
to
called
ours.
us stupid
In
and
1941,
uncultured.
the Brazilian Minister of Justice
An
Francisco
all too
Campos
typical
wrote
story, it
concerning the
seems, that
Japanese.
people tend
Their
to write in order
despicable
to make
standard of
themselves
living is a
seem
brutal
heroic.
competition with the country's worker. Their selfishness, their bad faith, their refractory character makes them a huge ethnic and cultural cancer located in the richest regions of Brazil. And once Brazil declared war on Japan in World War II, well, you can imagine that the treatment only got worse. Japanese Brazilians were simultaneously not permitted to live in ethnic enclaves, but were also not allowed to travel the country without special permits. Hundreds of Japanese schools were forcibly closed, and the government outright seized certain Japanese companies. Japanese Brazilians were prohibited from driving any motor vehicles even on their own property. Thousands of Japanese were arrested and even deported without cause on suspicion of espionage. Many Japanese lived in what were essentially concentration camps. Their former enclaves turned into prisons with armed guards. Brazilian politicians even called for all Japanese in Brazil to be directly transferred to American-style internment camps. Yet, in spite of this, throughout this entire period, there was never a single confirmed act by any Japanese against Brazilian national security. Not a single one. Mooney, I can hear you say, this is not what I signed up for. I wanted fun Brazilian stuff. This story is so sad, so heavy. How could the Brazilians do this to the Japanese? Did the Japanese ever manage to successfully integrate? Well, let me set the record straight for a moment. Brazil is a beautiful country
Yeah, this
with
is the
beautiful
dark-
people and a beautiful culture.
This is
It
the
has
dark side of
historical problems,
patriotism,
absolutely.
sadly.
But these problems, this
It
othering
exists
of a whole
in
group of
every
people,
country.
this cruelty, it is not unique to Brazil. In fact, I hope that in the upcoming portion of the video, as we explore how Japanese Brazilians eventually did integrate into Brazilian society on their own terms, that you non-Brazilians in the audience might reflect upon the history and present circumstances of your own countries and your own immigrants and your own ethnic enclaves, and the ways divisions develop in your societies, sometimes by the purposeful design of people who can profit from those divisions. Although the past few sections were very tough on Brazil, I consider this video myself to be a celebration of Brazil. Because this period of persecution, of genuine cruelty, is not where the story ends. In fact, in many respects, this is where the story actually begins. After World War II, Brazil began to move away from militant nationalism, only to replace the rigid order of the authoritarian junta with a disorganized new republic. It was this disorganized, chaotic time that saw Brazilian populism propped up as a means of maintaining some state identity before it inevitably collapsed into authoritarianism again with the military dictatorship of 1964. This period of the dictatorship was an odd one, and it has two names in Brazil. This period from 1964 to 1985 is simultaneously called the Brazilian Miracle and the Years of Lead. It is called the Brazilian Miracle because Brazil
I should
experienced
store all
an
my
unbelievable
items.
period of nearly 10% annual GDP growth, with its peak in the years of 1969 to 1973, fueled as it was by cheaper oil prices and massive government investment into both infrastructure and state industry.
Yeah, the nectar.
This period
I don't
is
need to
also
tell these
called
guys.
the Years of Lead
It's a waste of
because
time,
of the
that's a
horrific
matter of
human
fact.
rights abuses committed by the military government, including persecution and torture of dissidents, violence against journalists, press censorship, suppression of ideological adversaries by force of arms,
Can't
and
go back
more.
right now, though, or
Brazil
else
is fighting a war to understand itself.
I mean,
and it
I'm
would not
actually
be long
too
before
strong for
external
me to be able
causes
to
forced
comfortably
Brazil to come to
get
new
a good
terms,
score,
as the Brazilian economic miracle came
which is
to
hilarious
an abrupt end.
to
Meanwhile,
think about.
on the other side of the world, although Japan had been devastated
Okay, let
by
me
World
try
War
taking
II,
advantage of
the
this
Japanese
stupid
were
idiot.
rapidly rebuilding. With some help from the United States and a lot of very clever economic leadership, Japan experienced its own post-war economic miracle, the story of which I've covered in a previous video. It was, ultimately, the same single event that brought the Japanese and Brazilian economic miracles to an end. The 1973 oil crisis. In 1973, conflict in the Middle East, which we won't get into, led to members of the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries issuing an oil embargo targeting certain nations, including the United States and Japan, thereby seriously raising the cost of oil for everyone everywhere. The global price of oil increased from $3 a barrel to nearly $12 a barrel, which seriously stifled industrial output and energy supply. Brazil was immediately devastated, but Japan persisted a little longer, building a bubble economy which itself would collapse nearly a decade later. In Brazil, the rising economic power of Japan corresponded directly with a change in the perception of the average Brazilian towards their Japanese population. For nearly a century, the Brazilian government harshly persecuted its Japanese immigrants, and Japanese Brazilians were seen as non-assimilable and undesirable.
I think they have a limit
for
of how
nothing
much
but
they can
cheap
summon.
labor.
Which
But now
makes some
suddenly
sense.
Japan
If they could
had
just summon
money,
infinitely,
and people were buying
you could
Japanese
potentially
products.
just die.
Japan was projecting its culture and expanding its soft
Unfairly
power,
that
and
way.
the Brazilian people seemed suddenly to realize, well, wait a moment, our Japanese Brazilians might be more desirable than we thought. The Japanese, after all, were very educated and desperately wanted to be integrated in spite of harsh treatment by the Brazilian government and the Brazilian people. Once the mental picture of a Japanese person shifted in the Brazilian mind, from slave replacement farm laborer to hard-working agriculturalist from an economically powerful motherland, once the Japanese were invited to live in Brazilian communities amongst Brazilians and not pressured to live in their own enclaves for safety and security, once the Japanese were welcome in Brazilian schools as friends and peers and not as burdens to the school system, once the Japanese were given fair opportunities at work and access to government funding and support and opportunities to intermarry and share their own culture, the Japanese integrated. Where the Japanese were once all but confined to rural enclaves, by the 1960s, the Japanese-Brazilian population in urban centers surpassed the rural Japanese-Brazilian population. By 1977, the Japanese Brazilians, who made up only 2% of the population of São Paulo, added up to 13% of the student body at the University of São Paulo, and by 1995, 53% of Japanese Brazilians had a college degree compared to only 9% of the general Brazilian population. Gazeta do Povo, a Brazilian newspaper, published an article stating that common sense is that Japanese students are studious, disciplined, do well at school, pass the admission exams more easily, and, in most cases, have great affinity for the exact science careers. 60% of Japanese Brazilians are now Roman Catholic, where once nearly none of them were. The Japanese-Brazilian branch of martial arts, which you may know as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, spread throughout Brazil and into the world. The astonishing success and efficacy of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the pride of Brazilians everywhere, and it comes from the Brazilian Japanese. And as recently as 2017, a survey conducted in Brazil revealed that Brazilians of Japanese descent were the wealthiest group of people in Brazil. How does a group of people go from undesirable, impossible to integrate and hated, to the pride of the country, the wealthiest and most educated, and a model minority in what is really only about 20 years? How did these Japanese immigrants go from Japanese in Brazil to Japanese Brazilians? They were always themselves. That's all that they could be. It is the Brazilian people that grew, not the Japanese. It is Brazilian society that evolved past manipulative narratives of nationalism and populism, past divisive manipulation designed to create an impoverished replacement for slaves. And arguably, that remembered the teachings of its great leader, Pedro II, and his own vision for a diverse, inclusive Brazil that once looked as if it could be the world's first nation. Brazil isn't perfect, it has a long way to go, quite frankly. And although Brazil moved past nationalism and populism and manipulation when it comes to the Japanese, there are still difficulties of this nature to resolve. And I think many Brazilians are all too familiar with their chaotic modern history and feel embarrassed or guilty about the seemingly lost potential for greatness that Brazil once had. Here's another lesson, though, that the Japanese have for Brazil. In East Asia, one is generally taught that history is not a straight line from beginning to end. It is a cycle. good and bad, ebbs and flows. One's civilization is sometimes great and it is sometimes small. This is the nature of things. Times might be hard for Brazil right now, but there is a greatness
I am not
inherent
angry.
to the Brazilian spirit, a destiny forged of Brazilian character that sits just over the horizon, awaiting a Brazil that can remember its heart, while also progressing towards the future. Thanks for the Brazilian pep talk there, Mooney, but we haven't talked about Japanese games in Brazil yet. I know, we're getting there. Remember what I said just now about cycles? Well, in the 1980s, Japan's economy had grown to unbelievable and unsustainable heights. Japan, you see, weathered the 1973 oil crisis better than most countries, but in doing so had inflated a massive economic bubble. You may recall from the JRPG video that at the height of the Baburu Jidai, the bubble era, the Greater Tokyo area had a GDP larger than the entirety of the United Kingdom put together, and that the 1.15-kilometer grounds of the Tokyo Imperial Palace had a land value greater than the entire American state of California. Brazil, in the meantime, was struggling economically, as many countries were, in the aftershock of the 1973 and subsequent 1979 oil crises. The Brazilian economic miracle ended in abrupt disaster and political upheaval, and it seemed that the Japanese were only on the up and up, potentially even ready to overtake the United States. Does this situation sound familiar to you? What do you suppose happened next? Well, the Japanese Brazilians, seeing the vast economic fortunes being made in Japan, decided to return to Japan, bringing with them many non-Japanese Brazilians. In Japan, needing cheap labor to fill its needs, and happy that the cheap labor happens to also be culturally and linguistically Japanese, welcomed these Brazilians to Japan with open arms. The Japanese-Brazilian Japanese were called the Dekaseki, a term that means one who works away from home, but that has the same connotations, one might say, as gaijin does for a foreigner. Not necessarily pejorative, but still establishing that these people are different from us. And it is this massive influx of Brazilian-Japanese immigration back to Japan in the 80s and 90s that brought Brazil into the scope of Japanese culture, just as Japan was developing its fledgling electronic entertainment industry. By 1998, around 222,000 Brazilians were living in Japan, and they brought with them their food, their music,
Why and
their
how do
traditional
these
dress,
guys
and
breed
more.
like rabbits?
Have you ever wondered why the Japanese seem so smitten with bossa nova or samba? This is, in part, why. Now, the Japanese government hoped that the Dekaseki might be more easily integrated into Japanese society due to their Japanese roots. After all, the Dekaseki had spent decades in Brazil being thought of as too Japanese to integrate, and so they must still essentially be Japanese, right? You can imagine what happened next. The Dekaseki did not fit in very well with Japanese society at first, and the children of these Dekaseki in particular were treated no different from complete foreigners. The Dekaseki were accused of being not Japanese, and of being too Brazilian. Many native Japanese even took offense to the idea that these Dekaseki were learning Portuguese as a first language, and that many could not even speak Japanese at all. With the Japanese labor shortage only getting worse, thereby requiring more Japanese Brazilian laborers, many smaller industrial regions in Japan became increasingly populated by these Japanese Brazilians. The New York Times quotes Toshinori Fujiwara, an elderly Japanese community leader, whose community hosts a public housing complex for Brazilian Japanese called the Homie Estate, as stating, "I never imagined, in my wildest dreams, that this would ever become a multi-ethnic neighborhood." Which, if you understand the nature of East Asian high-context language use, you may recognize is just as much a condemnation of the Dekaseki as, like sulfur, insoluble might be in Portuguese. Many Japanese, particularly the elderly, do not understand the Dekaseki. They condemn the Dekaseki for playing extremely loud music and for not sorting their trash properly, and for being always late. Japanese shop owners will even follow around Dekaseki, whom they can allegedly immediately recognize to make sure that these Japanese Brazilians aren't shoplifting. Meanwhile, even to this day, the children of Japanese Brazilians do not automatically get citizenship, as Japan has no birthright citizenship, and thus, the cycle of misunderstanding and division continues. So, thus far, this video has been very heavy on the history. That's right, I've tricked you again. But there is a lot of direct relevance here to video games as well. Now that you know that Brazil and Japan have this unique cultural link, like magic, you are going to see Brazilian influences in Japanese games and Japanese media everywhere. It is inevitable. It is so prevalent, in fact, that we can actually observe Japanese popular perceptions of Brazil and Degasegi through the portrayal of Brazilian characters and Brazil itself in Japanese video games. Now, although the modern interaction between the Brazilian Japanese and the mainland Japanese begins around the mid-1970s, video games back then were still primitive and the video games industry was undeveloped. Sure, there were games like Donkey Kong which ostensibly represented New York, but even then wasn't made very clear in the game itself. It wasn't until really the late 80s and early 90s when more powerful arcade machines and home consoles were able to support more complicated games. And you will recall that it was the year 1990 in which the Japanese government first authorized legal entry of the Degasegi through special visas. This influx of Brazilians into Japan very substantially increased awareness of Brazil in Japanese society, and this phenomenon can be directly observed through the genre of fighting games. Fighting games were really the first genre of video games that necessitated an international cast. Fighting game developers figured out very early on that a game where everyone fights with the same karate or kung fu fighting style, wearing the same outfits, is visually and mechanically boring. Let's look at some fighting games of the late 80s and see what those character rosters looked like prior to the arrival of the Degasegi to Japan, and for that matter, prior to more widespread immigration into Japan itself. The earliest fighting and beat-em-up games in the 80s, like Data East's Karate Champ and Irem's Spartan X, featured only a single playable character who fought with either karate or kung fu,
I think
and
I've
often
fought
had an
long
American
enough. I'm
name.
gonna
But the
go
late 80s
murder
made
these guys.
rosters of these games substantially expanded but limited to the narrow scope of Japanese perception. Let's take a look at some case studies during this time period. We'll start by looking at Street Fighter I, an arcade fighting game released in 1987 by Capcom. There were only two playable characters in Street Fighter I. There was Ryu, a Japanese martial artist, and Ken, an American martial artist, with the same fighting style as Ryu. Their enemies were Retsu and Geki from Japan, Joe and Mike from the United States, ostensibly New York, but that might be a topic for another video, Lee and Gen
just
from
barely,
China,
apparently,
Bernie and
by
Eagle
1
from
point.
England, and Adan and Sagat from Thailand. It's an interesting cultural selection. No, this is us, Japan. This is our biggest trading partner, the United States. This is our closest cultural relative in China. This is our biggest trading partner's closest cultural relative in England, and this is Thailand. Look, that's its own enormous can of worms that I really can't get into for this video, but to make a long story short, there was a period in the 60s where top-level Japanese kickboxers held competitions between themselves and 3 Muay Thai fighters, which ended up legitimizing Muay Thai as a fighting style in Japan, but with the stigma of it being a sort of a vicious, almost uncouth fighting style which has its own complicated history concerning Japan and Thailand's friendly interactions in World War II, contrasted against Japanese society's general stigma against Southeast Asians. It's all very complicated, but don't worry about it. Just don't be surprised if you randomly see a lot of Muay Thai and Thai fighters portrayed as scary thugs with scars and eye patches. We can also look at Final Fight, which was released in 1989. The characters in that game feature almost exclusively Americans, albeit with a playable Japanese-American for good measure. And because the game is set in ostensibly late 80s New York, the enemies include a Dominican named Down and a Cuban named El Gato, who seems to have a thing for knives. And Abigail, the Mr. T stand-in. There were a lot of those too. No, we're not going to get into why in this video. Once the Japanese government starts courting immigration though, and particularly immigration from Brazil, the rosters of these games begin to change quite substantially. Street Fighter II was released in 1991 for arcades, and already we can see how the arrival of the Degasegi just 1 year prior influenced the roster of this game. There's Japan, 3 countries of great cultural and economic significance to Japan, and also Brazil, which you now know is also of great cultural and economic significance to Japan. The game's non-playable characters include Balrog, the American boxer, Vega, the Spanish assassin, Sagat, the eye-patch scary Muay Thai guy, and M. Bison, who is allegedly also from Thailand. Let's return a moment though to the character of Blanca, because the design and story of
Allegedly,
Blanca tells
because
us
we
a
really
bit
don't know
about how
anything
Japanese
about
society at the
Bison.
time saw Brazilians entering their country. Blanca was once a regular boy named Jimmy whose plane crashed in the Brazilian Amazon. After the crash, he was exposed to electric eels, which gave him his appearance and electric powers. Blanca is portrayed as this sort of barbaric ape man, strange and alien in his ways, the product of a regular person mutated by a strange place to become something less than human. This is not an intentional comparison, I don't suspect, but this is how Japanese society saw the Dekaseki at the time. Remember the JRPG video? The Japanese don't voice their issues or controversial perspectives bluntly. They do so subtly, and often subconsciously. Blanca's stage is the Amazon River basin. Many of the people in the stage are without shirts and some are without shoes. They live in thatched huts. They've caught what appears to be a pirarucu or arapaima gigas to eat. Another game we can take a look at from this same time period is Fatal Fury, which was also released in 1991. The main characters of Fatal Fury are Terry Bogard, his brother Andy Bogard, and Joe Higashi, a Muay Thai champion from Japan. Of the CPU-controlled characters from the Versus mode on SNES and Genesis, we receive the character of Richard Meyer, a Brazilian capoeira master who loves to dance and founded a nightclub called the Baum Baum Cafe. Take a look at this Baum Baum Cafe stage. You will note that everything about this stage looks Chinese. It's less pow pow and more Macau. Except for the dancing music men who aren't wearing shoes or shirts playing what I'd guess are capoeira instruments. Now that's how you know that this ostensibly Chinese ballroom is actually Brazilian. Portrayals of Brazilian characters in Japanese games then split along these two archetypes, the Blanca archetype and the Meyer archetype. We see Brazilian characters portrayed as almost bestial or primitive like Blanca in games like Breakers, which features a Brazilian character named Ryla Estancia, who has rippling muscles, crazy hair, sharp fangs, and long, painted claw-style fingernails. She also talks like a caveman. Ryla says, "You weak, you can't live in the forest." We see the Blanca archetype itself split in two different directions, with the characters of Rikuo from Darkstalkers and the more problematic Galrio from Fight Fever. Darkstalkers and Fight Fever were both released in 1994.
I think I'll end it
Rikuo is
here
a
for now.
merman, but one based on the creature from the Black Lagoon. Despite his origins, he is quite handsome for a sea monster, and he is shown to be a compassionate, caring person who keeps his promises. And of course, Darkstalkers is